The name is Roland Perry. I'm an author. I'm on my 42nd book. I jump around the genres. I've done more biography than any other person in the English language, I'm told by my publisher. Of the 42 books, about 18, 19 are biography. I've covered the royals, the presidency, World War One and Two, espionage with the fifth man. I'm on my seventh fiction at the moment because fiction allows you to be a little looser without getting away from the facts. And I love the game. I've been in it half a century, and I think I'm getting better. I wouldn't know. Maybe I'm getting worse, Tony. I have no idea.
Look, you're talking there about espionage. What
Yeah.
about, I mean, and also hinting that there's some problems with lawyers along the way of what you can and can't say in a biography.
Yes. Well, in regard to the fifth man, you're talking.
Yes.
Well, it was pretty dicey. I look back now, it's 30 years, and I had the biggest legal report that Pan Macmillan has ever had. I got home from a party with a girlfriend and had a bit of red wine. I walked into my apartment, and the fax, it was faxes then, had curled from my study down the stairs into my lounge room. It was about 70 pages long, so I had to answer every question. I didn't change anything, I just answered the questions. So we stood up on that basis, and I made it clear through my publisher to tell Rothschilds, it was NM Rothschilds, the bankers, lawyers who were dealing with this, obviously on Tess Rothschild's behalf. I said to tell them that he might go to court, that's my publisher, because they liked to sign cheques in those days. I don't know if they're still doing it in England, just to get rid of the individual who was suing. But of course, you don't get rid of Rothschild, so the money isn't the issue. Anyway, I just let them know that I would not be signing any cheques. If they tried to sue, I would go to court. And then they backed off. They stopped short of anything at that point. Now, the big issue at that point was whether I had libelled Victor Rothschild's wife. Victor had been dead for 3 years when the book came out, and I had interviewed her on telephone for quite a while, and she went into denial mode over that, which was really stupid of her because I had a recording. I had an affidavit from a British film director to say that I was in his office interviewing Tess Rothschild. Now, the new book that I'm bringing out now, I've changed the title slightly. It's going to be called The Fifth Man Update, a 30-year update, and it'll be the Rothschilds, the KGB master spy, and the gay royal traitor.
Can you put this into context with Victor Rothschild's career and what date you published?
Yes, that's a fascinating one because I had arguments with, when I was in England over this. I'd be at dinner parties. Oh no, Rothschild was a banker. He never got near spying. Well, he was a brilliant spy for MI5 and then after the war MI6. I just want to get one point very clear early on to show where I came in on this. The KGB master spy that I name in reference, that's Modin, Yuri Ivanovich Modin, who was a mentor, can you believe, for Vladimir Putin. Wanted me to meet him. He was a nothing in the mayor's office in St. Petersburg. It was changing from Leningrad then to St. Petersburg. I didn't meet him, but anyway, he was the mentor. Now, the key to this, and this is what everyone should understand, why it's complete rubbish to say they didn't spy on after World War II. All of them were told by the KGB, you can admit that you spied for us up until 1945. That's, very honourable. You're fighting the Nazis. Modin, the master spy, the one who controlled probably 20, but of course the spy ring that got everyone excited was the Cambridge Five, Burgess, Maclean, Philby, and so forth. He picked them up when he came to London in 1947, 2 years after the war had finished. This is a vital point to understand. He was their control for the next decade. Well, sorry, that's not quite right. He kept on controlling them even though he went back to Moscow. So the furphy about, they were wonderful people, they only spied up until 45 is not true. It's a complete fabrication by the KGB, a brilliant one, of course, because everyone fell for that, and even Philby was saying, "Well, I stopped spying in '45." Total rubbish. The master control, who was in London for most of that decade, was Moden, and he was stuck there to look after these spies. So that should destroy any of the rubbish that we've heard about them not spying on.
Can you just say something about the Cambridge Ring? Most people will have heard of Burgess, Maclean, Philby, Blunt, and there was a big question, wasn't there, in the 1980s, in the Thatcher era, a kind of battle to find out who was the final one.
Yeah, well, I was well back in the pack in England. I was living in England at the time. I lived there 12 years, and I was a journalist well back in the pack. You know, if they had 100, I was about 97, I would say. But I was determined, like a lot of people, to find out who it was. Now, the luck of the draw for me, whichever way you want to slice it, was that my father died. I had to go back to Australia. I started writing a book for a publisher in Australia there, and they had Spycatcher on their lists, and I was right up to date with everything happening with the Spycatcher book. That's Peter Wright. I got to meet Wright, I got to meet his manager, and all the files around that case were given to me, a whole box of them, massive 1 metre by 1 metre, and I was given to it because I got on with the publisher, and he was publishing a book of mine about Wilfred Burchard, who was a communist agent during the wars, the last three major wars. Now, I had then jumped from 97 till about number 4 in the list, I would say, in terms of comprehension of what was going on. And I was talking to Wright, and I was talking to his manager. This was after Spycatcher came out, and they both admitted, and Wright was the one that counted, that Rothschild had duped him and was the spy. He had been telling everyone that it was Roger Hollis, and that was the premise of Spycatcher, which became a runaway bestseller because Thatcher tried to ban it. And Malcolm Turnbull became Prime Minister of Australia on a false premise that Rothschild had been organised to out Hollis. That was a total misnomer. Rothschild had been behind pushing the attention of everyone following the spy case to say it was this Roger Hollis, who was head of MI5 at one point. Hollis was dead by this stage. When that court case came up in the mid-80s, he was long dead, and he couldn't defend himself. There's no way on earth or heaven that he was a spy for the Russians. But Rothschild managed to push it in that direction and con Peter Wright into it, and con Malcolm Turnbull into believing that Rothschild was the one that had done that, and that Roger Hollis was an unauthorised disclosure from Prime Minister Thatcher, which was totally untrue.
Okay, now, so there's still, Roland, a lot of, amongst certain people, contested about why it was that Thatcher so hated this Spycatcher book. I can remember it well. It was in the news all the time, you know, that we're trying to suppress it. People were flying copies of the book over from Australia. But was it because there were revelations in there? Because he did talk about Victor Rothschild's role, didn't he?
No, it was the major thing about the sales, which of course annoyed the hell out of me, because I felt I had a much bigger book and better book and more honest book, much more integrity. I mean, I don't think that Peter Wright lacked integrity. It's just he was completely on the wrong train in saying it was Roger Hollis, and that's what Rothschild had done. He had pushed everyone into believing that Hollis was a major spy.
Yeah, now, why did Thatcher hate the book so much? Why did she want to ban it?
Roger Hollis was not a spy, and that was her information internally, and she was not going to have, first of all, she's not going to have anyone saying that one of her top people, or wasn't hers, it was the nation's, because she wasn't Prime Minister in 73 when he died, but she wasn't going to have that. So that was the first factor. The other factors come into play, wanting to ban the book because it was totally inaccurate. And it was also a disclosure from a major operative, a major agent of the British forces, the intelligence forces. Now, those were the two factors, reason that drove her. And really, I think it was because she didn't win the case. I think that really pushed her out of office, because by the time this was all wrapping up, she was at the end of her tether and was rolled soon after that politically. So I
Yes, she
think she
was. Yeah.
went too far, but she felt she was on the right tram by saying, well, we can't have all these spies running around writing books and making millions of pounds. We have to say, no, you can't do it.
Well, you know
And
what? There
she
was
had the
loads
added,
going on in the 1980s. They were revealing the existence of MI5, MI6, GCHQ. A lot of these things up until really the 70s had been top secret. Victor Rothschild was very close to Thatcher.
no, he wasn't. That's not true. He was closer to Heath because Heath made him director of the think tank in the early 70s, but he was never close to Thatcher. And because of his behaviour behind the scenes, she was most suspicious of him. And you might remember in 1985 or 86 it was, she had to make a denial that he was the fifth man on the advice that she had. It was such a cold and an unsympathetic commentary in the Parliament that everyone thought, well, he must be a spy. It really reverberated, although she didn't know, Thatcher didn't really know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this episode does give us an idea that the politicians are very low down the food chain when it comes to knowing what's actually going on.
Absolutely. I think, yes, Prime Minister is a brilliant parody of what really happens, and that happens here, it happens in the States, it happens in France. There's no question that the organised bodies that are there for a long time, like the spy services, have much more power because their comprehension. Look what happened to Trump. He got completely rolled in his first term because those who wanted to put their oar in. In his second term, he's gone the other way completely and put his own people in to make sure it doesn't happen to him again with the civil service, with the departments. Now, it's the same everywhere. Those who are in it for 20 years, as a lot of these people are, sometimes 30 years, have much more power than the politicians. And it's very hard for the politicians because they're going to get on top of this stuff that I've been on since 1990. I've done 30 books since this one came out, but I've kept on with it. Now, you don't know whether you're a brilliant individual or you've got an average brain, unless you are a prime minister with enormous intellect that can do everything at all the time, and they can't. You can't keep on top of all this stuff.
No, you can't. And the temptation is to just read from the auto cue, the script that you're being fed by your civil servants and your political advisors. But look, the first interview I did with you about the original version of this book, Roland, you were talking, yes, I remember, about the Victor's role in the creation of the State of Israel, which obviously is quite apposite now.
Yes.
You thought he had a very important role in that. So this is, I suppose, quite controversial as a spy, as he was. So can you just refresh us with that?
Yes, well, you've got to remember Rothschild is an incredibly special case. He felt he was himself, and he was, because his grandfather had financed the Suez Canal. They'd financed the Anglo-French wars in the early 19th century. They were enormously powerful, and he felt he was part of that tradition. And what happened to him, putting it in a nutshell, was he joined in 1930s with the KGB and all the other bright boys at Cambridge, and felt it was his duty and his right to change society because he was that powerful. But he did it behind the scenes much more. And as I've proven in the book and added stuff in the new edition, he took the information to Blunt, to Burgess, to Maclean, all of them, gave them stuff that was passed on to their controls. Now, everyone knew that he was operating for the Russians, but he was never going to be caught in a park or down a dark alley passing information. However, he did go to a lot of the Soviet embassy parties because he was the great third Baron Rothschild, and he was always there meeting whomever was coming from Russia at that time, or the ambassadors and so forth. So he had enormous power, and he clashed with the head of the KGB, which was Ivan the Terrible Serov, because Serov hated Jews. There was one meeting that Moden told me about at the Soviet embassy, absolutely fascinating. Serov said, I want to talk to Rothschild. They were all there in their black ties. It was an ambassadorial thing. And so Moden went over to Rothschild, and Rothschild said, well, if he wants to talk to me, he can come over to me. And he didn't shake hands with Serov. And Serov was mightily put out because He knew that Rothschild was a big player for them, but Rothschild was not going to bend the knee to one of the grubbier individuals in the Soviet force. I mean, Terov had murdered lots of immigrants after the war, and he was a terrible individual. And he, by the way, it's his diary that was disclosed and published in a very small place in Russia in the 80s, which disclosed the relationship with Rothschild. And MI6 sent me a copy of it, and it was almost in passing, but he showed his distaste for Rothschild, but admitted that he was one of the key agents that they'd had operating in the UK. So that was one of the things that I elaborated on more in the current book. But I want to tell you that the revelation, one of the big revelations in it, there are plenty, is that Tess, I'm very open about the fact that Lady Rothschild was also spying for the Russians. It wasn't as big as a husband, of course, but she definitely was in it. And you have to, I mean, I'm not going to spell it all out here, but when you see it spelled out, you'll understand why I came to that conclusion. It was fairly conclusive. The other thing that I have disclosed, and it's not substantiated in the way I would like. I didn't have a birth certificate, but Moden said to me, and Michael Whitney Straight, the American member of the spy ring, whom I wrote a biography on called Last of the Cold War Spies, they both said that Blunt was the bastard child of King George V. Now, I couldn't prove this. All I had was the evidence from them passing it on to me. Now, Moden wouldn't tell me that. He wouldn't tell me that unless there was some substance in it. Nor would Michael Whitney Straight have told me. And he was a lover of Blunt. And there's another factor that people have got to know. This is making it quite sexy for you. But Moden told me that Blunt had actually had a sexual affair with Tess Rothschild. And everyone goes, oh, no, he was gay and she was this and that. Well, no, he was that close to Tess Rothschild. He had an affair with her, and he was much closer, that's Blunt, to Tess than he was to Victor, although Victor was the key spy. So all these little things going on behind the scenes are all part of the rich tapestry of everything. And by the way, the Russians were incredibly prurient. They just hung on all this relationship thing. They had it over Michael Whitney Straight because he'd had a sexual affair with Blunt. They had it over all of them because they followed their sexual proclivities, and it was down on their files, so everyone knew what was happening. It was the way they kept them in check, apart from the fact they were spying. If that was disclosed in a surreptitious way, their sexual proclivities were part of it, and that's one of the ways they kept them in the web right up until the 70s.
You mentioned at the start, I mean, we're talking about Blunt. He was very much involved with the royal family. Yes. Is the banking world, do you think, closely linked to the intelligence world?
It definitely was with Rothschild because he had the power. I mean, he got that's the UK, and Australia, and the Russians, get that, the Soviets, to vote for the State of Israel. That's how powerful he was. Now, think about that. You can't just tell Stalin or anyone, if you're not someone with enormous power and influence, he got them to back the State of Israel. So that's nothing to do with the banking as such, but he did use the bank for all sorts of activities. And he was very influential in many ways, Rothschild. I think you've got to see it in the context, Tony, of how great the family was, and he felt he was just part of that greatness. He got caught up in the socialism and the communism because he felt it was his duty to change the planet. He didn't think small. He thought, I'm a Rothschild, I'm in a position of power. The British system has to change because it's top-heavy. Very few people control the whole thing, and the plebs in the country need a lift. All that stuff was going on in his head. So he felt he was duty-bound as a Rothschild to change all that.
It seems that the whole craft of journalism has changed since you were working in Fleet Street. Would you say you think it's changed or not?
You're asking a tough one. I'm still involved. I mean, I'm on book 42, and I'm going to actually publish that one myself. I don't know at this stage. I've had big publishers up until 41. It changed in the sense of Look, I came out of an era where integrity was the key. You know, getting the facts right, digging hard. I mean, the Rothschild thing I was on for 30 years part-time, only piddly bits every now and again, but it was coming into me all the time. You never give up on it. And I felt that I hadn't really driven it home. And the book did pretty well in England and Australia, but I thought it was going to do better than Spycatcher naively because I had the proper story. In fact, it was William Armstrong, the publisher at Pan Macmillan, bought the book and he said, "You've explained the entire espionage thing with the Cambridge Five." I didn't mention that in the book at the time because it sounds chest beating, but I say it in context now. He was the top publisher in this era, and he said to me, "I'm publishing this because you've explained the whole thing to me," and that was naming Rothschild as the fifth man. So, what's changed? I mean, you look at the states, it's just divided. No one cares about the integrity of events. If you're on the Democrat side, you lie, and if you're on the Republican side, you lie for your benefit. No one gets the kernel of what the integrity of events are. It's not happening. Who knows about Trump's relationship with Putin? I don't. I've heard lots of things. I mean, I've been following that for a long time. Someone said he was an asset, which is different from an agent. In other words, it's someone who's conned into supporting a country by inducement, you know, using his property companies and all the rest. There's been no proof of it, but there's been a lot of innuendo and rumour for a long time.
They said the same about Harold Wilson, didn't they?
Yes, they did. I think with Trump it's very interesting because I followed his pronouncements since the 80s, and one of the things he was very heavy on in the 80s, I'm not talking about last week, was the breakup of NATO. NATO weren't doing enough. Right? Now, no one in the West was talking about NATO wasn't doing enough to bolster the European defences against Russia, against the Soviet Union. And here he is saying, and he's still on that mantra. Now, that could have been, I don't want to indict him without real facts, but it could have been a talking point from someone in the KGB who got to him, had a nice lunch with him, said, "We're going to invest in one of your towers in Moscow or in New York," and then said, "Look, there's an issue here. We think that, you know, you should mention this. Why isn't NATO supporting itself rather than the Americans supporting it?" So he started that mantra in the 80s. Quite incredible.
Well,
so
no,
he's incredibly...
This guy you interviewed, Modin, you say he was quite close to Putin. How do you see Putin as emerging and developing now?
Putin was he was small fry when I was supposed to meet him. I didn't meet him because my plane had to go. I knocked on the KGB door in Leningrad, and the secretary said, no, it wasn't the case, it was at the mayor's office. He had a year in the mayor's office there down in Leningrad, and I didn't meet him. My plane had to go. I didn't know. He was a little pipsqueak nothing, but Modin wanted me to meet him. Now, he was a little pipsqueak nothing in the KGB, but he built up his tremendous influence, and of course he has spent for a long time, the only departments that got extra money and grew were those under espionage control. In other words, he got the GRU, which was the military, he got the KGB together, he controls, and he's above it all. He's the full dictator in Russia. No one can take him on. And it may be, and I'm not putting Trump in a very bad light here, but I'm saying he admires Putin because he has that control. Look, Trump wants that sort of control, and he can't get it in America. But he admires Putin because he's got it. And so there's where Putin stands. He's all powerful, and it's going to be very hard to assassinate him and get rid of him. And he doesn't want to go, and he won't go. I don't know how it's going to end up, but he's certainly all powerful at the moment.
We're really here to talk about Victor Rothschild, aren't we? And so
yeah, sorry.
I know it's all right, but we ought to focus, I think, on what's been going on in the Middle East. I mean, we've created, the British mainly, and Allenby, and I know you've written about that too, created this kind of crusader state, which is now, I mean, people are pointing at Israel and saying this is basically a nuclear-armed doomsday cult. What the hell are they up to? Yeah,
well, it's fascinating. You've got to put yourself, I always like to put myself in the position of the people who are involved. So you sit there with Netanyahu and they hammer them on October the 7th, and how many? 1,200 died. Now, what does he do? what would your Prime Minister do when Hamas says, we're going to kill all Jews, we're going to get them? He had a very good excuse to say, well, we will kill you first, we'll knock you off, you won't knock us off. And they are very powerful client state of America, and they are America's real bolt hole in the Middle East. So that's not going to change overnight. The Americans will back them right through, and they have a very good excuse. I don't think it's an excuse to murder everyone and slaughter people, but they will say, well, Hamas has stated, and they have stated, and still stating it, will destroy Israel. Well, if you're in the state of Israel...
Because, look, it's the same the other way round, and 1,000 people or so killed in Israel, many of whom it looks as if were actually killed by the IDF as well. You're then saying that you're going to kill 50,000 civilians and you're going to turn the whole...
No, wait a minute. You're saying what's the proof? No, Tony, you've just thrown in the IDF. What proof have you got of that?
There's loads of evidence that the IDF, as they were, like particularly the tanks, hitting kibbutzes where people were being held, and helicopter gunships firing at the festival and things like this, they were killing some Israelis as well as just the Hamas people. So, look, I mean, but the point is we've got 50,000 dead now, and they're talking about bulldozing Gaza for some sort of American beach resort.
No, that's Trump's idea of having a resort situation. That won't happen. That's bizarre, and that's the property developer in him saying all that. What disappoints me, and I've been right through the Middle East, right through Transjordan, Saudi, Syria, and so forth for 2 books. One we're talking about now, also 2 war books, and I was very disappointed that they haven't. Some of those Arab states have not taken refugees from that area. It doesn't mean they have to take them all out, but they haven't taken any. The Egyptians haven't. No one said, well, we'll take 1 million. No one said it. And that's disappointing to me because they're supposed to be supporting each other, but it doesn't happen that way.
For people who maybe were, millennials, people are only like 20, 30 years old. Why does this guy Victor Rothschild and his role in MI5 in the Second World War and MI6 in the Cold War, why does it still matter today?
Well, because he was part of the tremendous spy network that is still running today. Now, though it's a very fascinating question, which I've covered in the book to a degree. I mean, it's another book. I'm not going to do it. Others can do it. But so successful with Moden and Philby that they created a huge raft of spies that are now, Tony, retiring. They're in their 60s, right? And they're retiring and getting out. I know that. I know some of them are leaving. I've got one contact left in the KGB, as it was. It's the Russian intelligence service now. I've got one left. But they've done their duty and they've set up tremendous networks everywhere, and they are very influential. So what I'm saying about the Cambridge 5 and the Cambridge 20, there were more than 5, but the key ones were, we know, the 5. They created the espionage world that is dominating now. It's the Soviet Union that's still the most dominant force. And the Chinese are trying to come second because of their cyber work and their computer work in that direction. But the Russians still are running rings round Western intelligence services. And that's because it was set up by Moden, and Rothschild had a big say in that by covering up, by deflecting, and letting those spies that are in place, they thrived after World War II.
It's a bit like the oil. Of course, if Victor Rothschild and the Russians have got someone right at the top of British intelligence, again, this is a way of totally undermining the state. So anyway, what's the title of your new edition, please, Roland, and where do people get hold of it?
Right, it's on Amazon. Amazon Books you've got to look at. Now, it's not out for a couple of weeks. I've got up the e-version, but it's not. It'll be an audio in a couple of weeks, and you'll be able to buy it in hardcover and paperback. And I know that sounds odd to a lot of people, but if you look at the page, you'll have the audio you'll have the electronic, and then you'll have hardcover and paperback. I've bought a couple of the previous book I put up there, which was published by a normal publisher. Now I've done it. So that's what happens. And the title will be The Fifth Man, a 30-year update, the Rothschilds, the KGB master spy, and the gay royal traitor, which is Blunt. I do quite a lot of work on Blunt's relationship, and while that's going to be a bit of a shock for a lot of people saying it can't be true, if you read my book, you'll see the number of times that Blunt worked for the royals in special operations right through to the end of his life. That's Blunt's life. He was operating for the royals, and it's a fascinating link that no one really has gone into, because the royal biographers, basically a bunch of sycophants, have avoided all that and concentrated on Blunt's wonderful career as an art historian. Well, he was a wonderful spy and a very effective one, and he was a royal. Again, I didn't get a birth certificate. I think it's well beyond circumstantial, and other people will pick it up now. But the royal sycophants, the biographers, some of them write very well. I won't mention their names.
Well, actually, there's Andrew Morton, isn't it? Has written actually quite.
Oh, he's a lightweight. Come on, you can't.
No, his thing on Diana was explosive originally, and there's I think it's so many carnations or something. He wrote a book which looks at Blunt's role in going over to Germany after the war.
Yeah, I've had that.
To pinch a
I've
load
published
of.
that.
Yeah,
I've published that in 2 books. That's old hat. He's just copied that.
What was Blunt up to over there then?
Well, he was getting all the royal letters, all the evidence of the relationship with King Edward the Eighth, with the Nazis. He was getting there. You've got to remember, this is again, put it in context. It's 1940s, and they were worried about the image of Queen Victoria. She sent all her letters over to her daughter there.
Roland, we got the First World War, where all these people, this one family, were actually behind the war. It was basically a family squabble. So, of course, there's going to be some correspondence. Should be historically very interesting.
No, we're talking about Victoria's life. I mean, that's one aspect of what Blunt was forced over there. I mean, he did it because he was a royal himself. I think you've got to put it in the context of he was a half-brother to King George VI. He was the bastard son of the fifth, and he was uncle to Queen Elizabeth. That's why he got away with so much right up until Thatcher outed him in 1980, I think, 79, after Andrew Boyle's book came out.